Live analysis now, and who better to discuss than Amrita Sen? She's head of research at Energy Aspects, joining us live out of London this morning. Amrita, so good to have you on. As I just mentioned, OPEC pumping more oil, but the market is really skeptical that the group is actually going to be able to ease some of the tightness we see out there. Is this new production agreement going to result in a meaningful number of barrels actually coming back to market? And your reaction to what we've seen over the last 24 hours?
No, I think exactly what you described, right? The market is skeptical, and rightly so. Even though overall, over the 2 months, we've got well over 1.2 million barrels per day of headline production coming back. This was supposed to come back over 3 months. OPEC is bringing that over 2 months now. But in reality, we are only expecting about 560,000 barrels per day of that to actually hit the market over the 2 months. That's peanuts. We are still looking at over 1 million barrels per day, or around 1 million barrels per day of commercial inventory draws in Q3. We've moved the needle by about 100,000 barrels per day on average in terms of actual production, because we just don't have enough spare capacity. Russian production continues to fall. So it's just simply not going to change the picture very much.
Let's talk about the overall optics of it, though. This comes ahead of President Biden's visit to the region. Some have called this somewhat of a diplomatic rapprochement, perhaps even an olive branch being extended from the Saudis to the United States ahead of this visit. Just help me understand the overall geopolitical implications and what ultimately led to this. The White House has already welcomed this move from Saudi Arabia, but is it OPEC calling the shots, or has that pressure from the West actually worked here?
Of course, the White House coming out and saying they welcome the decision is them almost saying, we did, they want to take the credit for the fact that, we convinced OPEC Plus to do this. But the reality is that, OPEC Plus has been fantastic at managing the market, right, over the last couple of years, through the ups and downs. I think they've really managed to make sure that the market is balanced. But secondly, for Prince Abdulaziz, this was a difficult meeting, and he has shown all the skills that he has really in keeping both sides together. It had to appease the US to an extent, but this is really at best a gesture. Like I said, you get a few 100,000 barrels per day higher. Does it really change the outlook for oil? Absolutely not. If anything, you could argue now that we know what OPEC is going to do for the next couple of months, traders are probably going to pile back in on the long side. And you are going to continue to see prices climb higher because of just how tight fundamentals are. And on the other hand, he had to make sure that the cohesion of the group is together, it stays intact, Russia stays intact, because clearly Saudi Arabia and other OPEC Plus members do value Russia in the group. So you kind of had to balance that. This was a very tricky meeting. Yes, it was concluded in 11 minutes, but only somebody of his caliber could have navigated this. But in terms of the US side, I will say it's at best a very small gesture. But yeah, it helps that the Saudis have moved somewhat, and that helps to potentially actually have the Biden MBS meeting if it were to occur at the end of the month.
Indeed, and full commendation to Prince Abdulaziz for being able to thread the needle here, effectively navigating a multitude of different risks on both sides. I think you're exactly right to call that out, Amrita. But when it comes to President Biden heading into Saudi Arabia, do you think this diplomatic rapprochement of sorts could actually result in Saudi Arabia perhaps adding more barrels to the market down the pike?
This is the question we are getting as well, Dan, since pretty much yesterday after the meeting. Difficult to say in terms of whether it is going to be happening or not. It's not a really black and white answer. I would say, yes, there are signs that the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia is improving, but it is just that it's still very, very early signs. I think any change in Saudi policy for oil is going to be gradual. We really do believe that. And I don't think Saudi Arabia will actually flood the market. They've worked too hard since April 2020 to actually bring the group together. And the last thing they want is to actually just throw all of that away. Prince Abdulaziz has also been highlighting that this is much more to do with refinery capacity issues, that there just isn't enough, which we've been talking about as well. So even adding more oil is not necessarily going to get the price down. I think there will be very difficult conversations around this. Yes, there will be tweaks at the margin. That's how I would put it, rather than an outright change in Saudi policy.
Okay, tweaks at the margin. Amrita, what about when it comes to Russia's overall future influence on the group? Of course, any suggestions that this symbolises or reflects a breakup of the group have been firmly shut down. Russia is still going to have significant influence when it comes to OPEC decision-making in the future. But as you know, we have seen OPEC granting exemptions to countries like Libya, Iran, Venezuela in the past. What about this question of a Russian exemption moving forward? Is that something that could also be under consideration?
I'd say that come September, well, right now come August, because that's when the current deal, or rather OPEC Plus, will have added back every barrel that they took off from the market in May 2020. Once that's happened, so that's the end of August, you should expect to see some form of a new agreement in place, because again, nobody in OPEC actually wants to go back to April 2020, and they don't want to relive through that. But with regards to Russia, yes, I think an exemption could be on the table in terms of at least discussion, because like you said, Libya is exempt, Venezuela is exempt, so why not Russia? But so far, Russian volumes have come off, but not nearly as much as we were expecting. So I think that will be critical. By the end of the year, with the EU embargo kicking in, the losses could be substantial. You're talking about millions of barrels per day. Right now, production losses are closer to 1 million barrels per day, could easily double. I think that's when the conversation will start. So maybe it's something for 2023. But yes, I do believe conversations will have to start pretty soon as to exactly how to keep Russia within the framework of OPEC+.
Especially if that production continues to decline. Amrita, you mentioned earlier that we could see prices move higher as a result. Oil on track for its sixth weekly advance now. Sanctions plus insurance constraints plus recovery in China probably equals tight market moving forward. So where does that leave prices in the second half if you look into your crystal ball as it stands?
I wish it was that easy. These days, that crystal ball is moving quite widely on an hourly basis, given all the policy changes that's happening. But look, one thing I want to say very clearly, we were headed higher before Russia. We were at $95 oil, Brent, in February this year, definitely heading towards $100, something we've called for well before COVID happened as well, because this is just an underinvestment story, a story that is only getting worse with Western policy continuing to subsidize demand at a time when demand needs to come down, and making it even harder for oil companies to produce with windfall taxes and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very difficult situation to balance the market. OPEC Plus has limited spare capacity, like we just talked about. China, as you mentioned, is very critical here. We are at $120 oil, I want to reiterate, without China. China comes back, we are headed a lot higher. So there isn't a very quick solution to this market. And I think that's the challenge we have right now. And that's why prices can continue to head higher quite substantially in the kind of coming months and probably into 2023 as well.